All right, let's start this. Good morning, everyone. All right. Don't hide. You're why this is happening.
No. Everybody else is why this is happening.
That's a very important point. This
This is a group effort. I'm just signing the checks. This is everybody else. This is your conference.
Not if you read the email thread.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us.
Yes.
You wanna?
Okay. I would like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you for giving us another chance to make this happen. This is a group effort in so many ways. Is this thing on? Yeah. I really don't know what to say. I had all sorts of notes, and it's all just gone out my head. So I'm going to introduce Jack Daniel, who's going to give you our keynote on the state of security BSides, because that's really the important stuff. Here, Jack.
Thank you. All right, so we have a lot of stuff to cover. I'm going to launch a bunch of conversations in the middle of this, but first I want to go through a few things, and we will not have time to cover everything we want to, especially with organizers, but we have more time this week, and we have that internet thing, which we should use. And with that, I'd like to start. And for those of you with us the first year, we did almost take it to the next step. See if my animations will work today. Probably not. For those of you who have been with us for 3 years, here's about a minute and a half of the past 3 years of Security BSides Las Vegas. Yeah, we have air conditioning here. All right, so that's not a bad start for 3 years. But as Banshee said, this isn't about me. This is not about her. This is about us. Don't worry, I'm not going to break into kumbaya or anything, but I truly mean that when I'm talking about this community. So what have we done? In less than 3 years, that says 3 years, but it was actually the 29th and 30th 3 years ago that we did this. 3 years ago today, a few of us were wondering if we were going to pull this thing off. In the past 3 years, BSides events have been held on 5 continents in 9 countries. 34 different cities have held events. This is the 53rd BSides event. I think that's a pretty good start. What does it take to do this? It takes hundreds of organizers. It takes hundreds of speakers. It takes hundreds of sponsors. It takes hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers. And it takes many thousands of participants. And that's a key word. Participants, we're here to participate, engage in a conversation, and have a good time, share information. And that's BSides. That's where we are. So, it happens because of the people I mentioned. Thank them. I'll do my usual very quick sponsor spiel. If you have the PO book in your desk and want to write a bunch of POs, there are a lot of really cool companies that make this happen. However, most of us don't have the PO book, digital or otherwise. So figure out what these companies do. That's my ask to you. If you don't know what they do or what they do today, if you haven't looked at one of these companies in a few years, take a look and see what they do. And sometime somebody's going to say, who does this? It's like, well, you know what? I want to look at this company because they bought me booze, or whatever the rationale here for your being here is. So thank them, and also do say thanks to the sponsors, the staff, speakers, everybody. We appreciate that. So with that, State of BSides.
Thank him.
I don't think me. The State of BSides. So this is going to go quick. I've got some notes on this. I'm going to quickly go through the state of the organization, the parent org, mothership. We haven't even decided on what we call ourselves, but a few different pieces of that. I want to spotlight some of the events that are happening around the world, and I will give the event organizers like 8 seconds to say, stand up, wave, and yell something about your event if you're here, because there's some amazing stuff happening, and I really want to shine a spotlight on all of those other events. Ooh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Boom. So we're going to look at some of those other events. I don't want to slide anybody, but the ones that responded to my call on the organizer's mail list for slides got slides thrown in there. Everybody else will try to cover. And then we're going to start some conversations which will continue over adult beverages later. So, Acting Board of Directors. Currently, Mike, Don, and I, who've been involved since the beginning, are the Acting Board of Directors with Gene Kim, who's joined us. Gene is a supporter of BSides, but hasn't been involved since the beginning, has experience with nonprofit boards, so he brings a supportive but not deep insider perspective, which has been greatly appreciated with his business acumen and experience. And it's 3 for now, because it takes us 6 weeks to schedule one conference call because we're all busy people. Like those of you that volunteer to do this stuff, you have no spare time. Once we get things established, we are going to add officers, maybe board members. It kind of depends on what the organization ends up doing, how we split the responsibilities between those of us in the room informally and formally. So that's happening. It's moving. We're not excluding anybody. I want to dive into this one very quickly. So I've got 2 sets of numbers. We had a CPA perform full financial audits of the 2 complete years of BSides. 2009, there were no BSides org finances. It was all spun through BSides Bay. Was a standalone event, which has moved on to be something else. And this event in Las Vegas, we emptied pockets and threw down credit cards, and it just happened. 2010, footnote here. This is checkbook accounting with GAAP or accrual commercial numbers. They add up, but you have to wade through a full financial statement to actually see what's there. I can explain some of them, but these are rough numbers to give you an idea how much money we're talking about that's processed through the org. Most of this would have gone through Las Vegas and San Francisco and what we processed for other events. So sponsorships, we were promised $79,749. That's promised is a key word. Cost of events, room rentals, food, beverages, transportation, rental of equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Expenses, computers, bank fees, PayPal, blah, 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 blah. End-year receivables was about $12,000. This is not a bad thing. There were companies that deferred payment, one in particular deferred payment, so that we had this in the bank at the end of the year instead of that in the bank at the end of the year. So end-year receivables are not necessarily a bad thing as long as we get the money eventually. So that was the first year. Second year we opened with the 1100. $204,000 inbound. Cost of events was $166,000. Expenses, we had professional services got added in last year. We had a variety of adjustments, including purchased equipment, which became an asset, depreciation, other things. Again, I'm trying to do checkbook accounting with a CPA audit, but the numbers line up. End-of-year receivables, again, there was a large one in here, which was actually paid first week of January, which kickstarted San Francisco. So the good news there was we ended this as an S-Corp in California with 138. The numbers all work. We have a CPA who is a classic CPA. Yeah, I went over the numbers again with him just a couple of weeks ago, and it's all done. It's the way it's supposed to be. It should be done. We have not done a mid-year point. We're going to push forward with some other things. Hopefully have our 501c3 filing done soon, but we need to decide what that's going to look like. So, speaking of 501c3 filing, we're all doing this in our spare time. If Mike and Amber and Mr. Nickerson and I were knocking down $175 a year to run BSides, we would have been a 501c3 a couple of years ago. But we have day jobs, and so we just sort of wandered along and decided last year it's time to do it. And we've run into some questions. We needed to do audits because some questions were raised. We have clean audits. We got those done. We underestimated. We chose a competent CPA. The problem with that is his tax season starts in about October and runs until May. So we finally have the numbers. We're clean. But now we have some questions we want to ask you about the direction of BSides, which will determine how we structure this organization. And there is one big question we'll get to momentarily. So current status, a couple of key points. We have stopped doing house events. But global organization, we feel our primary responsibility is to the organizers. As event organizers, those of us who organize events feel our responsibility is to the participants, the speakers, the sponsors. We're directly responsible. So as part of the team that's putting this event on, I feel responsible to those of you in the seats as attendees, as participants of this event. But as the org, we're there to primarily support the organizers. What that looks like we'll define a little bit. No more house events. There's been some frustration with competition for funds. This event is a separate event. By the end of this year, the finances will be completely segregated. San Francisco will be standing alone. Everybody's standing alone. There are no more house events. Everybody's raising their own money. There's some downsides to that. Sponsors want to send global money in, but we're not competing is the big thing, and there's a lot of work and responsibility involved in distributing global funds. One of the things I want to talk about too is people that make it happen, and some key roles are being distributed. Everybody saw Michelle this morning when you came in and registered, and Michelle has done a lot. Michelle has volunteered at numerous BSides. She has been the lead organizer for BSides Dallas-Fort Worth since the beginning. The third one's coming up this year. She does sponsorship coordination and liaison with all of the events in Texas. We'll get to that in a minute. And so she's taken over what I used to be the point person for, which was when you want to run an event, new event or repeat event, you reached out to the info at Security BSides. I would answer as soon as I can and as completely as I could. That was not always as fast as I wanted to, because, as I said, I feel my responsibility is to the organizers. And so Michelle has stepped up into that role. Michelle and I are spreading that. She does most of it, but now there are two of us, and actually more, that are doing that organizer outreach. We're following up. We're making sure you're on track with your events. We're making sure you've updated the wiki. We're making sure we help you promote your event. And Michelle has taken the lead on that amongst many other things. She also wrote a great document. If you are an organizer or potential organizer, make sure you see the draft document that she's generated. We'll get it to you if you haven't seen it. Norbert Griffin continues his role as our liaison to the Great White North. Oh wait, global warming, it's not so white anymore. But But and also is available and is filled in a little bit when we need to do these initial calls and share his expertise, having been involved directly and indirectly in a lot of them. And Martin Fisher, Armor Guy on Twitter, has recently stepped up and will be working with Michelle so that we really have people who can answer your simple questions easily. A lot of those simple questions, though, should go to the BSides Google group, the BSides organizers Google group. That's where the hive mind is. That's where people who have run events with well under 100 people and under $3,000 budgets to those of us that have run 600, 800 person events at $100,000 budgets. You get a lot of great information from that core of the community. So moving on, financial processing, I touched on this briefly. We were processing funds for individual events. That meant that we would accept the funds from the sponsors and then disperse the funds. Part of that receivable adjustments were trying to figure out what money went where and should have gone through, and it requires a CPA and a bookkeeper to wade through that. It's a big responsibility for us. It puts us on the hook for either saying the sponsor didn't pay, we get wedged in the middle of it, and if we had, again, the magic wand and we hired a couple of clerical people to work full-time that had bookkeeping and accounting skills, this would be no big deal. We're not there. We'd rather that money be available for events in your community. We're not saying we'll never do it again, but for now, that's suspended until we get everything sorted out. One of the things we've realized is that to do this is part of the reason we need to retain a CPA and hire a bookkeeper and do everything right. We're going to have to do 501c3, federal. We have to file taxes anyway. We have to do that. So there's an issue there, and it may be worth it. That's one of the things we're going to talk about. So here's the big question. This has come up. Our idea has gone back and forth through the years. Some of us have been involved in conversations many times. And it's basically big org or little org, to boil it right down. Big org is we go back to trying to be able to process funds. Maybe. We go back to trying to provide more services for event organizers, provide more direct support. That means we're going to do receivables maybe for you. That's a burden. Equipment. Some people think we should do equipment. Any of you that have done anything from a scout troop to church group to BSides to whatever know what happens with equipment, no matter how responsible the people are. So there are a lot of bag. So there are all sorts of possibilities there, but just processing funds by itself, we figure $4,000 to $6,000 to hire professionals so that there cannot be questions about the money, because these are people who are doing sponsorship for goodwill awareness. This is not, it's coming out of the marketing budget, but it's not traditional marketing. These are companies that want eyeballs. They want to connect with people like us. So it takes a lot of responsibility. So that's it. Little org is a different animal. The little org, we do what we're doing now. We formalize it as a 501c3. We act as a catalyst to pull the community together. Should we need to do brand protection, that would probably fall to us within what we could do with it. We would try to centralize promotion. We'd do things like push our InfoSec Island relationship and get more content fed to InfoSec Island, reach out to more mainstream press, our friends in the press that are here today and will be through the next couple of days, do a more concerted effort for those sort of things, but really back off a lot of the other things we've tried. And that ends up with, we keep the wiki running, we have a couple of email accounts, and we don't need a CPA to do the audits. We buy software, do the audit, submit it to the feds. It's short money. Wild guess, don't hold me to this, just making up a number. We could probably do this for $2,000 a year. Probably, I'm going way high, by the way. I would, if we go this way, we could probably do it for substantially less than that. That's one of those sponsors that's like the nice people I work for and the people in the cabanas who like to write big checks for us would, one little check that wouldn't take from your event would cover this. So that's a discussion we need to have, and mostly with the organizers, but with everybody in the BSides community. So there's that. So back to this. Boris Pixelfill did this artwork for me. These t-shirts are around somewhere. You'll be able to get your hands on some. 3 years, 5 continents, 9 countries. 53 events in 34 cities. If you spot the typo, I'll give you a hug. I'm not giving anything else. And the typo's my fault. I proofed that thing, I don't know, 20 times. So here are some of the local events, regional events that have happened. 34 cities. One thing I want to say right here is some of these cities did events that are no longer BSides events. I missed one. Wow. No, I didn't. Yeah, I did. Anybody know which one I missed? I just said the event. I missed Mountain View. Oh, there's 2 typos. I missed Mountain View. So that's Bay Threat. That's one that evolved into a different event. BSides Berlin has evolved into Berlin Sides. It's a different event. Minneapolis St. Paul did not repeat, may do something again. It'll be a different event if they do. Phoenix is going to evolve into their own thing. That's great. This isn't about competition. This isn't about ego. We were able to help people develop the conferences they wanted to develop using what we've learned and give them a launch pad. That's what we want to be able to do. If it's a B-Sides, that's great. If it's not, it's not. I'm going to kick myself for the rest of the week over missing. How did I miss that? So anyway, here we go. This is Cryptia's artwork. So let's start with the B-Sides Las Vegas, because I know a little bit about this one. Security B-Sides Las Vegas Incorporated. That's right, we are incorporated. We are a state of Nevada nonprofit corporation. We are a charitable and educational corporation. We established it as charitable and educational. This is straightforward, but if we're going to move, this is straightforward educational. If we're going to move forward, charitable means we might be able to do something. We're running $100,000 events here in Vegas the past 2 years. That's enough money that we might be able to start shifting money into other causes. No idea where it's going, but that's why we are registered with that. The goal is, should we have the funds to do it by the end of this year, we're going to do a federal 501c3 filing. I have, as a side note, here's a conversation for those of you that have significant others to have. Hey, honey, I got good news from my lawyer in Vegas today. No, really, we're a corporation. Hey, honey, my personal account is running light. I got to send a check to my Vegas attorney from our joint checking, okay? These are interesting conversations, you know. It's good news from my attorney in Vegas. Anyway. Exactly. So Genevieve, Joshua, and myself are the board of directors here, and this is for this event. And these are sort of random from here on. B-Sides Los Angeles, coming up in just a couple of weeks. First one was a big success, and as often happens with regional events, a lot of people felt left out and thought they should have been involved, and there's more buzz, and the next one's going to be bigger and better. So that's just a few weeks away, 3 weeks away. Community focused. This is one of them that has a big outreach to higher education, which puts a different flavor in B-Sides events, and they usually work extremely well. It's cool corrupting young minds. So good luck there. All right, so B-Sides London. This one is growing like mad. This one, I was actually in London during this, but I was earning my living, and we were doing extremely well at the show I was at, so I missed it. Killed me. It is growing amazing numbers. As you can see, they had 295 show up, almost double. B-Sides Texas, here's another corporation. Michelle Klinger and Michael Goff are have formed an LLC headed towards 501c3 as finances become available. And this is a blanket organization for the state of Texas. So B-Sides DFW and Austin are under this. Cindy, who's also working the registration desk, is taking the lead on B-Sides San Antonio next year. And there's some talk about possibly doing one in Houston, but there's another event that Michael Farnham, a friend of many of ours, does, which is HUSECCon, so we don't want to compete with that. But B-Sides Texas is moving. They also are doing Code 2600. At the next couple of B-Sides, they're going to do screenings of Code 2600. And there's that. B-Sides Rochester. This is another one with a high education, high student population. Very good show. I've been lucky enough to be at the past 2 of these. It's in a very cool old Masonic temple. beautiful theater.
More pizza.
Hey, Jack, can I say a word about Code 2600?
Yes, please do.
So anybody else, coordinators, we have a meeting tonight. If you're interested in doing this with your event, I've been working with the director for over a year to make this happen. We can do this at multiple BSides to help draw people in and get some attention. So if you're interested, see myself. Michelle's obviously pretty busy up there. But I'm available to talk about this subject with them. I think it's really cool and just to hand out this art.
Yeah, thank you. That's Michael who took over the Austin one, which is great. Thank you for that, because the first Austin event, people wanted an event in Austin. Ben, Tom, Have, and I set it up from 2,500 miles away. But then the local community took over and has turned it into a great event. So yeah, speak up. If your event pops up here and you want to give a quick shout, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to crank through so we can maybe have a little bit of conversation here. Chicago is growing, has shifted organization teams, has grown dramatically, added a bunch of workshops. They're building some structure. I want to call out a couple of the Midwest ones. A couple of these Midwest events, Detroit also, are formalizing their organizational structure, but are also working together as sort of a Midwest cooperative or collective and sharing hive mind for things that are more tightly regional and working together, which is very cool. So Chicago is growing. Speaking of, BSides Detroit is formalizing, is put a lot of effort into thought and postmortem and really working this, really developing this. One of the things that some of these organizations are doing is starting to move towards defining what they do. So BSides Detroit is really becoming what their target is. It's a destination conference. In other areas where the community is underserved, BSides is becoming more than just an annual event. And some of these will cover that. There are meetups. London has a meetup outside of the big event. There are meetups almost filling a void that an ISSA or an ASIG or a 2600 chapter might fill. Other places, but with the BSides thing. And they have a killer team cranking on that one. Who else? BSides Delaware is coming up. It's at Wilmington University again. It's another one full of students, but also it's in Delaware, so it's in the middle of a lot of very interesting technology. Josh and Janice do a great job there, and they're going to crank up. And they've done it on a shoestring for the past few years and still managed to raise quite a bit of money for Hackers for Charity and EFF. BSides Memphis, they're doing the first one in Memphis. It's a big tech city, but not a lot of tech community. And so the team working on that one is putting stuff together. It's coming up. They could use some sponsorship. They could use, I think the CFP is still open, but they've got a handful of things out there. This is one of those underserved communities where there are a lot of people that work in technology but don't have the resources. Got a couple more of these. This one, BSides Sao Paulo. The Al Mangle at the Garoa Hacker Club is apparently a really awesome group and does some great stuff. And they've ran a couple of conferences last year parallel with You Shot the Sheriff and Hackers for Hackers, right? And they have migrated into being part of the BSides community. So these events run parallel with something else, but start out as a way to increase the destination value of attending You Shot the Sheriff or whatever. There's a free alternative. There's an extra reason to make the trip to Sao Paulo if you're not local. There's an extra reason to grab a hotel and stay an extra day if you're not local. There's just a real strong sense of community. Every time I see this, there's one of the footnotes here. Here in the U.S., the Fogo de Chao and other things that call themselves Brazilian, but they're actually Brazilian-style barbecue. If you have barbecue in Brazil, it is not Brazilian style. I'm very jealous about that. And there's another one coming up this fall. So that's coming up very soon. I've got those dates coming up. So this one, the first one was there. That was our first Latin American one. There are a couple of people interested in doing one in Puerto Rico. There's a lot of Latin America that's underserved. So it's out there. St. John's, I mentioned Norbert before. This is his event up in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a long way away, but it's on the street that has the most bars per capita or per inch or most pubs per square foot of any street in North America. I That's an accomplishment. But anyway, it's a great event. Another underserved community pulls people together, and it's an interesting one from what I've heard. I haven't been able to make it, because the size of the community means that you have trench level people and executives sitting side by side because it's too small to stratify. Another first one coming up, BSides Charlotte. Not nailed down yet, but we've got some good folks working on that one, and that'll be interesting. I expect to see a couple of interesting turns on what happens with some of the tracks. I bet there'll be more hands-on just based on some of the folks that are there. Portland was a good event last year. A lot of our friends at Tripwire were behind making that happen, and they're going to repeat again this fall. Had great feedback on that one. That one's open, and that's up in Portland. Interestingly, they've made this happen. Seattle, there are people working to make Seattle happen. It never quite comes together. The Portland community just pulls itself together and makes it happen. Vancouver is like Seattle. There's a lot of interest, but it just doesn't come together. So folks in Portland have made it happen. Here's another one, BSides Jackson, Mississippi. Another community that desperately needs what we do, and they're starting to do this. So this is very cool stuff. San Francisco next year, the goal is to push this out even larger. The dates have been announced. They're on here. 24th and 25th. Same venue, next door to RSA. As a quick aside, I'm doing okay on time. As a quick aside, RSA, some of you know that we had a little tension with RSA this year. And as I've said, I don't run that event. And it sounded like things were escalating, and possibly in hindsight, maybe I should have picked up the phone and called Gene and tried to settle it out. But the reality is it got settled out. They want to work with us. They understand. They're not actually, just a little perspective of working with other events. They're not afraid of 1,000 people next door. The size of RSA. But people like Gene Friedman, who are very smart people, see the value of what we build in the speaker community and want to be part of that. The other people that are protecting their brand are looking at, roll back 6 months, that set of numbers I put up. So I've missed one city. So I've missed one city. So 54 events. Wow, I'm going to kill myself over. 35 cities. So by that time we had been in 29 cities, and we're at 40 events in 2.5 years. If you were running an event and that train was coming at you, no matter how far down the track, you'd want to do something about it. And so they've actually offered a variety of things. Some of them won't work for us. I mean, there's some interesting offers made. They won't all work for us, but we're going to work together. We can't announce anything, but there are possibilities of actually getting perks from RSA, because all the students that come over from City College can never afford even the $200 fee to get there. We're going to work together. I will briefly say this because we're having a meeting later this week. We are working with the folks at Black Hat. Trey Ford, who's a friend of many of us, great guy. He's earning his stripes this week. He's had a few challenges in the past week, but he's doing very well. And we've had a lot of conversations. I actually spent the Barracuda party sitting with Trey and other Black Hat folks at RSA this year to talk about how we can do it. We have a little bit more challenge here. We're a 2-day event. They're a 2-day event. Guess what? They're the same 2 days. Unlike RSA, we're looking for similar sponsors, the same speakers. We have a broader selection of content because we're not as attack focused. But if you boil it down, it's the same 2 days, same sponsor dollars, same speakers, same content that we're looking at. We have a lot more flexibility in content. We're looking for edgier stuff, newer stuff, things that don't fit as well. But so the thing to do is to not throw stones at each other. We've grown past it. It's really, we've gotten past the point where we get to play the underdog. We put that slide up with those numbers. 5 continents in 3 years for free events run by volunteers. We can play underdog, but some people are stopping buying that. But anyway, so we're going to work with Black Hat. The only one that I see ongoing problems with is South by Southwest. And they are so large and we are so small that we're just going to work around it, I think. Is that fair to say, Michael? Yeah, If you haven't heard, Michael and I spent an hour and a half, a year and a half ago saying yes sir, no sir to a very nice fire marshal. We didn't have to leave the whole building. Anyway, BSides Pittsburgh, we've got a good team of organizers. 2 events have been completed. They're working on the 3rd event for next year. Added local interest talks, which was an interesting thing. Lockpick Villages are very common, video streaming. They need more and new speakers. And they brought in some local food. There's actually, this down here is a BSides Pittsburgh logo cookie. BSides Quebec is happening. The first Quebec event is happening next year, May and June in Quebec. BSides DC, Washington DC, there's been a lot of interest every year during ShmooCon. People feel left out, want to do a BSides and compete with ShmooCon, and yes, there are issues with ticket availability and speaker acceptance at ShmooCon, but most of us love ShmooCon because it has capped its size, which does create some artificial stuff. We don't want to compete with that. That is a reasonably priced community-run event. We don't want to really compete. If anybody wants to do one and work with Heidi and Bruce, I'm sure they will. But in the past, there's also been a problem. Black Hat DC has been about the same time. This one is in the fall, in October. They're working on it. They have a great team of people already working on this one because once a couple of people decided to act as the catalyst, this one is coming together quickly and will be a good one. So quickly, I'll run these slides at a loop at various places during downtime. But Los Angeles, Memphis, St. John's, Little Rock, Sao Paulo, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Salt Lake City, Delaware, Portland, Jackson. And then next year already on the calendar, San Francisco, Austin, Chicago, San Antonio, almost everybody's repeating. That new Quebec one, Las Vegas. Unless you guys think we should stop now, I think Banshee and Josh and I are planning on doing another one. So, as long as you don't oppose that idea. If you are in these areas or know people in these areas, Vancouver, Denver has had a couple, could use a little kick to get another one going. Seattle, New Orleans, there's a little interest, but not enough of a team. Bangalore, there's an interest, a group of folks from RSA is interested. They may be able to make it happen. Warsaw, they need a little help, but they're trying to do one this fall. Columbus, Ohio, Raleigh, North Carolina, blah, blah, blah. New York City may actually take off this time. Singapore is not a typo. We're working with the folks at Singapore Polytechnic to make an event happen. We have the backing of the faculty, but they need a lead organizer right now. Toronto, Cairo is not a joke. We've had 3 different parties suggest this. The first one was when Mubarak was still in power, but just barely. To give you an idea of why I shouldn't whine about typos in my slides, these guys were talking about rebuilding the security community during the revolution. They were unable to pull it off. College students stepped up. Now we have another group that's interested in doing that. Some of these people are doing some very interesting things. Anyway, Green Bay, a bunch of them. If you know people in these areas, you're in those areas, reach out. So, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to light this up. As I mentioned, if you are an organizer, if you're committed to doing an organizer, one of the things we ask is that you join the organizer's Google group. That's where we have conversations that are organizer-specific information. The BSides Google group, the regular Google group, open to anyone who wants to join, as is the LinkedIn group and Facebook group. Those are mostly pushing a little bit of information out. But we ask organizers to be on there so we can get that information out to you. And so here are the conversation starters, and I'd like to get a few things back from you here, but really we need to do more. So the big org or little org question that I framed. And how does that get defined? And then we sort of framed this, and Gene gets credit for most of the framing these questions, but we want to know what it takes to do a good event from your perspective as an organizer, or maybe from what you see as a participant or volunteer, but it's two-part questions. As an organizer, what's a good day? As an organizer, what's a bad day? There are a couple of really easy ones. Good day is when the check clears from the sponsor. Bad day is when the sponsorship doesn't come in, but the money needs to be paid. Speaking of conversations had with your spouse, I got some credit card charges this week that are interesting, but the money's coming in, so we'll be good. And then towards the big or little org question, is there one thing that the BSides Corporation should do for organizers and events? And is there one thing we should never do? And let me throw a couple of things out, and then in 10 minutes or so that we've got before I have to wrap it up, we can do it. Good day. There are a couple of common threads. It takes money to do this. If you don't know, those of us that organize events pay for what we don't raise. It comes out of pocket. There are people that have spent thousands out of pocket to make BSides happen. My wife's married to one. But anyway, but that's okay because this is worth it to me, right? You know, I don't build race cars anymore. I don't do it. This is cool. It's worth it, but it's got to be worth it. But the money is a common good bad. But there's more to it. One of the common threads on what's a bad day is when you can't do something you want to do for the participants of the group. That's kind of nebulous. It doesn't really help us define things, but it's, you know, that was a common thread which tells you what the people that want to organize these events are like, right? I didn't get to have free t-shirts, or we couldn't afford to do this. And it's not about the money, it's having to turn people down. These are a little different. The most common thing was provide the ability to process funds. And as I said, that's a big help because otherwise you personally are getting checks. You know, that's a burden. You personally are going to have to give a 1099 to the sponsors. You're going to have tax issues. If you're planning an event where you buy out a boutique hotel for the second year in a row, you have bank accounts and you have attorneys in Vegas and things like that. If you're planning a small event, that's a burden that you have to take on. We understand that, but it adds a burden to the organization that you have to tell us if it's a burden we should accept, and then accept that we're going to have to raise money to make that happen. One of the things that I think the organizers group can do is help you understand how you can protect yourself, minimize your exposure without having to rely on a third party. And that might be a real value, and that might be something that an upcoming document that we could get folks to work on would do. You know, what happens with a bank account? You know, how do you deal with your taxes? And some of these are different. Obviously, the folks in London have a different set of tax issues and corporate issues than we do in Las Vegas. The folks in Singapore are going to be a completely different animal. So those are questions that I'll throw out. And if anybody wants to, you know, in 10 minutes or so, I get 5. All right, so that's right, we've got to wind down. Yeah.
I was going to say, so if you're, in terms of if you're not processing it through the corporation, what I think would be helpful is if we could prime the sponsors to sponsor a thing rather than money. So if you could say,
Very good point. So Nick's saying if we can prime sponsors to pay for things rather than money, and that works extremely well. If you can get a sponsor to pay for the room or the venue or the food or the party director, that's great. So actually, I've got to wind this up. I've got about 5 minutes. So I want to be keynote-y for a minute. A few of you may have seen this, but there's something I like to talk about in closing thoughts. And so I'll be around today and tomorrow, and I'll be at DEF CON off and on, and we have the internets when they work. But I want to talk about this guy for a minute. Isaac Newton. Pretty smart dude. My favorite Newton quote has nothing to do with math or science or physics. Newton said, "If I've seen further, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants." The guys that are moving us beyond Newtonian physics in CERN, no matter what they say, are more firm believers in Newtonian physics than anyone in this room, because if Newtonian physics doesn't work, that God particle doesn't stay in the tube. This guy changed the way we see the world around it and investigate it. He changed our outlook on the universe. And had the humility to say, if I have seen further, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants. So I want to ask all of us here for one thing that I like to ask. And it's actually easy if you do it the right way. And what I'd like to ask of everybody here is to be a giant. Provide shoulders for other people to stand on to see further. You don't have to be a giant in the industry to help somebody out. It doesn't even have to be in this industry. But all of us have had the advantages of the people that have given us a break, answered a question on IRC, loaned us equipment, money, expertise, mentored us, people that we've mentored who we've learned from as we expose our own hypocrisy as mentors. That's it. You know, you don't have to be a giant to be a giant and help other people. And that's what BSides is about. And I do have one other point, which is wear soft shoes because we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. So let's keep our egos in check and remember to thank people that we owe a thank you to. And with that, I say this a lot, but not often enough. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be part of this community. And with that, I hope you guys have a fantastic time and learn a lot.